So I have been doing data work for over a decade now, and that is why I know and that I can tell you that data by itself is not that powerful and not that useful. We get really excited about data. If you're ever a product manager in a large organization with executives, they might be like, we need more data, we're gonna buy data, let's get the data and then do data science with it and something will happen. But we use that word really generically, and data on itself is not gonna get you anywhere. Collecting more data is not really useful if you're not doing something smart with it and if you're not using it to make good decisions. And so what's really important is actually actionable insights. Those add a lot of value to your organization, and I would say that it is your job as a product manager to be the person who transforms data at your organization, whether that's in analytics or something far more complex, into actionable insights for everybody else. A lot of the work that we do as a product manager is to say, what are the features I should build with the engineers that I have? Where should we spend our time? What's the single best thing that we could be building right now to move the needle for our users, to move the needle on revenue, to move the needle for the organization? And all of that is you essentially needing to find a source of data, whether it's the sort of quantitative stuff we're going to talk about today, or qualitative research or whatever, to bring it all together and turn it into an insight. And an insight you can actually take action on. That's one thing that's really important. I think when you're envisioning what data could be for your product or for your role as a product manager, it's easy to get super excited and to nerd out and build this big idea of what you're going to do with data that's not really actionable for you today. So part of what you want to do is figure out today, with the reality of the engineering team I have, the resources I have, the money and time that I have, what is the sort of data I should be collecting or using, and what is that right level? So I'm investing the perfect sort of MVP just right Goldilocks amount, rather than spending time on things that are going to be costly and not really help me move the needle, or missing pieces of information that could help me make much smarter decisions. And so what you really need to ask yourself as we look at this broader question of what sort of data is meaningful and important and the right level for my product today is what can you actually take action on? And I think a lot of times when we talk about being a product manager, we say that we're trying to solve problems for users. We're looking for pain points and we're trying to solve them. Your approach to thinking about data should be really similar. You should ask yourself, what are the problems that I'm trying to solve, but with information? What are the questions I need to answer? And if I answered them, I could do a better job. Set about to set yourself up for success with the exact right thing you need. So all of that setup gets us to actually looking at what the product data spectrum really is. So we start off on the left with off-the-shelf web and app analytics. This is things like Google Analytics, Omniture, Amplitude, all sorts of third-party tools where that particular product's whole job is to let you see how users are interacting with your site or with your app. You can move on from there. A lot of those are just off the shelf. You can create a lot of custom information. You can do custom events within all those third-party apps, or you might be building the sort of product that's generating information on its own, right? People are uploading content, people are saying things and doing things. All of those are pieces of sort of events, we call them, the analytics space, that you can be taking advantage of and learning from. The third next level is variant testing. We hear most often about A/B testing. There are actually a lot of forms of variant testing, and we'll go into that later. But this is where you get into the space of actually doing experiments and saying, I'm not just going to look at the data that's already happened, I'm going to do an experiment to use this actively as a decision-making process. After that is managing multiple data sets. This is if you're pulling in third-party data from anywhere, if you're trying to build a larger database that unifies things across your organization. Advanced math for analysis. This is where we get into the data science space, and I've actually broken these out into sort of 3 zones. The earlier zone is collection, this is generation, and this is when people talk about data science. There's actually 2 main different things that people are doing. And we're at the point sort of as an industry where the role data scientist might be doing very different things in different organizations. But the 2 blocks really are advanced math for analysis. We'll talk again more about the details of what that is a little bit later on. And then the last is predictive machine learning models. So when people talk about AI and machine learning, that's that last step. Not all data scientists are doing both, and not both of those are appropriate for most organizations that you might be a part of. So I'm going to actually dive in and talk through who each of these is right for, what kind kinds of products and sort of product people should be using each of these different levels, what these levels actually power for you as a product manager, what you need in order to be able to take advantage of them, and then things that you should be thinking of and not losing sight of as you make some of these sort of decisions and think about data for yourself as a PM. So we're going to start with sort of off-the-shelf web and app analytics. So this is for everyone. You should never launch anything without having some basic analytics on it. All it takes is a single line of JavaScript. There are a lot of free options, and the free options are really, really feature-rich. You can just take, you as a PM can just throw that line of JavaScript for Google Analytics or Amplitude or both onto your page, and that's all you really need is that in the header, and then you're all set. You get a ton of free functionality. So there really is no excuse not to have this, and it lets you do so much of the basics that you really need. So with those free accounts, and most of them eventually will have a traffic limit or eventually will have special features that you have to pay for. But anyone that's launching something new, whether it's your side hustle, whether it's your first product of your own, or whether you're launching new features at a larger organization, will be able to do all of the sort of common KPI tracking that we want. Are people coming to look at this thing that I've built? Where are they going within my app or within my website? What are they clicking on? Are they converting? Am I growing or not growing over time? All of that is included in the free feature set of any of these analytics things. And again, KPIs, that's a whole different talk, but you should, as a product manager, have a sense of what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to get more users? Are you trying to sell something, do conversions? A lot of that is going to be available just in a free site. And again, that all comes back to you as a product manager. You're managing other people's time as well. You're deciding what your company and what your team is going to be building. So that information is going to let you prioritize of those things that I could be working on to fix or to make better. What is a good use of my time? And even just those basic metrics that you'll get with this free version is enough to go tell a story to someone else. A lot of your work is also to convince people that you're right, that your prioritization made sense. So a very simple example of this is that I have a personal website, visionomsil.com. It's not good. I made it years ago. It has like a photo and some links to my other social media. And every once in a while, I'm like, wow, shouldn't I have a better website? Like, I'm a really good product manager. Why is my website so bad? And then I go to Google Analytics because I put the JS on the top, and I'm like, no one comes here. That is not worth my time to make a better website for myself. It's a better use of time to like go to the gym, go hang out with a friend. Anything that I want is better than spending time on my website because nobody goes there, right? That is a really good example of me using data to prioritize my time. It is a really silly example, but again, I don't do anything with that site, and I still put the Google Analytics there, and yet it still helped me make a meaningful decision. So the bar is really low here. Make sure that you have analytics on anything that you put out into the public. The one thing not to forget is actually that those free versions are so feature-rich and so awesome because they're trying to trap you. There is a big cost to switching between one analytics system and another because you can't transfer the data from one to something else. So if you start and you put Google Analytics on your page, and a year down the line you decide that something else is better for you, Google Analytics is not in any sort of real and feasible way going to let you take that data out and transfer it to the other place. You can often get the data out, but you have to put it in a database, process it yourself. It's not going to upload to the other place. And so part of the reason they make the free version so awesome is that you start using it, and then hopefully you have a successful product and you grow, and then you're trapped and you have to pay them. So be mindful of that. Put more than one on your product. If you're at a small, scrappy startup, there's no reason not to use more than one. At 7Cups, we use Google Analytics and Amplitude. We pay for one, not the other. So you can make those decisions, and there's nothing against having more than one. But again, be thoughtful about what sort of the end goal is of the thing you're building. And if you do start at a large organization, they will already have analytics, and you won't have to make that decision. But just so you know, that's why the free ones are so good. So again, off the shelf, everyone, no excuses, put this on your product. So this is where you take that sort of web analytics to the next level. All of those analytics are about capturing the interactions between people who are using, whether it's your app or your site, and the things that you've built. So this really is all interaction data. We're not generating other kinds of information. And custom events let you get a lot more specific. So the regular version is going to capture unique users coming to your page. It's going to capture the links that they're clicking on and where they're going. But let's say you have a sign-up flow, and you're trying to figure out when people sign up for my product, do they click the button that I put in the header, or are they clicking the button that I put sort of in this big splashy thing that I was trying to get their attention with? You won't know that with just the basic version. You have to do a little bit of work to capture those events in these systems. So that is going to take sort of engineering time. It's not that hard. You can even sometimes outsource this work if you're doing something complicated and you don't have the sort of expertise on your own engineering team. This is something that you can contract out, and it's one of the times where it may make sense to go to an expert instead of building it yourself. It's not that much additional work. Pretty much any large organization, or just even small, any size organization who's a little bit more sort of established beyond their MVP will be doing this. Doing this really well, again, can be the difference between understanding sort of what's going on with your users and getting really specific. If you have a conversion funnel, so you're trying to sell something, if you're trying to sign someone up for a newsletter so that you can engage with them and keep their attention going forward, all of these things, all of these sorts of interactions that you're hoping will happen on your site are things that putting in custom events and capturing more detail about exactly where in your user interface they're clicking or doing something or not doing something, this is really worth your time. There are some other sorts of custom events outside of something like Google Analytics or Omniture or any of those. So again, is someone uploading something to your page? Are you trying to get people to save stuff? All sorts of different products can have sort of things that they capture, and those might be things that you're either looking at in one of these. Maybe you have like a shopping checkout cart and it has its own little dashboard and you can customize that. So there are other things, but a lot of the time it's going to be getting more specific about what on the page the user is actually interacting with, so that you can set up goals for yourself to say, I want more people to sign up for this thing or purchase this thing, and here is what I'm going to look at to make sure I'm getting there. This is also where you start to be able to make choices, right? Google Analytics just calls page views whatever it calls it. The same with all those others. There are a lot of default things like, is this person on a mobile device or desktop? You don't have to worry about structuring that information or naming it. As you get into the custom space, if you don't tell your engineers, they're just going to name things whatever they want. So they're going to set up a custom event, and they could set it up really in a really useful way, such as call to action, login, header. That told me a lot. I don't need to look up what that is. I know that that's a call to action to click login in my header, or they could name it login 3. And then I don't know what I'm looking at, and later on down the line when you try to do some things with that information, you're going to be confused. And so it is worth taking the time to think about, how am I naming things, how am I structuring it, just knowing that hopefully whatever you're doing is growing and like getting more advanced with both your data work and other things over time. And just a little bit of thought at the beginning is going to set you up for success. The next one is variant testing. This I also think, I'm just a big data person, but I think it's for everyone with enough usage who can afford to invest the time and some of the money that it takes to do A/B testing. A/B testing is another thing that used to be, some people did it. Now every job description for a product manager wants you to have already done it. They want you to be really good at it and understand it. For anyone who doesn't know, variant testing means actually putting up live on your site more than one version of something with small differences to see what performs better. So your goal with an A/B test is, let's say you are trying to get someone to purchase something, and you have your last page in your purchase flow where someone is actually going to click, finalize information and check out. You might say, I have the version that's live on my site right now. I'm going to create a different one that changes sort of the size of the button or the text on it, or what I'm literally maybe it takes 2 clicks and you're going to get down to 1. Whatever it is, it's usually a fairly specific and not that thing changed. You actually put both versions up on your site and you wait for people to interact with both versions. They're either put into an A version or a B version, that's where the name comes from. Each person will only see one, not the other. You leave it live long enough that you are getting rid of the chance that the reason that these behaviors were different was because you looked at only 10 people, you looked only on a Monday, and things are really different on your site on a Tuesday. There's a lot of other variables that are there. So you want to leave it live enough that statistically you can be confident that version A or version B is actually better or worse than the other. And so that brings me to something that I think a lot of people don't realize about A/B testing or variant testing, which is that you need a certain amount of traffic and usage to be able to do it. On day one of something, you probably don't have enough interaction with your product to actually get to a point where your A and your B look any different in your information. That takes a certain number of people coming and interacting and doing something. So if you're working on a big consumer product like Spotify with millions of users and millions of actions, you can probably run tons of A/B tests. at the same time live and come to significant conclusions pretty quickly. If you're working at a smaller startup, or if you're working, let's say, at a B2C company, where a B2B company, where instead of being open to every sort of consumer, you're trying to target, sales managers at XYZ place and there's fewer people interacting, you may not be able to run any A/B tests at first, or you may have to be very careful about what you're going to focus on to test. It can, once you get into A/B testing, be really exciting and you want to test every single thing, but you probably can't unless you're working at a giant company. So with A/B testing, as it is with pretty much anything else you do as a product manager, you need to prioritize. But if you do have that traffic, there are several different options for how you can do this. There are now a lot of third-party products and analytics suites that let you do this. Amplitude, for example, if you have engineers to help you set it up, you can use Amplitude to monitor your A/B testing. Optimizely is sort of a pure A/B testing product that you pay for just to make it sort of a little bit more WYSIWYG to do an A/B test. Once you set up Optimizely for the first time, you have some engineering lift at the beginning, but then as long as you know some basic sort of front-end CSS, you yourself can go in and set up some experiments and sort of set them live without your engineering team helping you. So there are different options, and you can even sort of build out something really custom if needed. So when I was at Mashable, we actually did build out custom variant testing. We had Optimizely and other things, but we had a hypothesis that the title of an article is the most important thing that influences whether someone is going to click into it from social media, from anywhere else that they see it. We had plenty of evidence to think this was the case. Logic tells us that the name of an article is going to decide if people are going to click on it or not. And so we actually built out a multi-arm bandit, which is it's not just A and B, it's running multiple variations at once. We changed our workflow so that our writers and editors had to publish things with multiple title versions, and we even built an engine that not just ran multiple versions on our site, but we could actually run multiple versions on Facebook, which is a paid thing on Facebook. So we did an API integration with their marketing suite, so we could spend a little bit of money at the beginning of publishing an article to see, is there a big difference between any of these headlines? And if there is, lock that one in as early as we can so that most people who see our story, because stories have sort of, you have a limited time window to get somebody's attention with them, to really maximize our returns. And we actually were seeing enough return on that it was worth spending money on doing a little bit of sort of paid advertising testing, because there were often pretty big differences between how people were reacting to different headlines, even though all three were written by expert writers, right? A lot of times, something like that, you don't really know what the outcome is going to be. That, for us, putting in that effort to do the custom work was worth it because that was our bread and butter. People clicking through on things on social media, sharing them, coming to our site, if you're an ad-supported product, that's how you make money. So because it was at the very core of what we do, doing custom work was meaningful. When it came to doing sort of shopping on our site, we started doing stuff that was like, here's reviews of sort of different products that you can purchase. And we wanted to do sort of a purchase checkout, and you could go buy it on Amazon and all of that. That is not our bread and butter, right? That was something that was new to us. It's not at the core of the main thing we do, which is being a content site. For that, we use Optimizely. So sometimes you can do more than one of these, but you have to think thoughtfully about what is the most impactful to me. Those are the things where it's worth a higher investment. And again, the real goal there is to sort of put up a version and say, I want to sort of make a change, and I want to make it the most possible that the change I'm doing is an improvement. Sometimes you make a change, you did really good thinking as a product manager, and people don't like your change as much, or something you don't anticipate happened. How can I make sure that when I'm making a change, I'm minimizing my losses, like really taking away the chance that I'm going to make things worse, and maximizing my gains? If something is really good, let me build the evidence to make that change really quickly and sort of roll it out as quickly as I can. So if you have a question. Yeah.
Is it advisable to first do segmenting before shipping out the test?
Right, so the question, just repeating it for the recording, is it advisable to do customer segmenting before the test? That's really good. The answer is really going to vary. In general, when you A/B test, you can sort of A/B test against everyone, and in your analysis, you can break out. Sometimes you have to do it at the beginning, depending on the product you're using. At the end, you could look at things like, do people on desktop react differently than people on mobile, right? If I have, depending on my setup, when I'm running this test on an app versus a mobile site, am I getting different responses? Depending depending on what your like testing framework is, you may have to figure out what you think those likely differences are at the beginning and do it that way. In my experience, device has been one of the biggest things that does change people's behavior. Maybe if you were in a place with sort of different account types, that sort of stuff could be really meaningful. I haven't personally seen a place where sort of a demographic split, for example, would make sense to say, hey, users in this age group or in this gender, let's look at how they are reacting differently. But products are so varied that there could be a case for that. But yeah, one of the biggest ones that'll be different often is different devices, because you're literally looking at different versions of the screen. And yeah, it's a general answer, but sometimes it will make sense, and oftentimes you can apply those if you have a cohort created or a segment that you've already created. After, in the sort of post-analysis of your experiment, you can slice and dice what's already happened. The more you cut up your audience, the more of that traffic you're going to need to get to significance. So if your total number of people who come to the page is 1,000 and you've split it up into 5 segments, and they're sort of like the max that you can have in any one of them now is like 200 people, or maybe I'm just making this up, it's going to take you way longer to get enough of that particular segment of people to interact so that you can make any decision. So that's the risk you run. Again, if you're in a place with a ton of usage or a ton of traffic, that's not a problem at all. If you're doing something far more targeted, that might be a reason to be mindful about the segments you set up. So that's variant testing. Again, I said a lot of things and I said some cautions out there, but variant testing is very powerful. It is worth doing for those bread and butter things on your site. It's also worth doing anytime you're doing like a really big redesign or a big change. You should be doing all sorts of qualitative research beforehand. You should be using your best knowledge of your users and everything to figure out sort of what should actually go into your redesign. But a lot of times people get very emotional or attached to things that they've already built, or they get emotional and attached in the design process in sort of talking and sort of brainstorming with each other about what things should be. This is a great way to move away from people's feelings about what's going to be good, including your own feelings about what's going to be good, and actually look at how your users are really reacting in an experimental way. It's a real shift in the way that your product culture and your entire company culture is working. And sometimes you're really excited about something and nobody cares, right? And that's fine. You have to live with that as a product manager. Better to figure it out earlier than to sort of invest far too much of your time before realizing it. Moving on into sort of managing multiple data sets, this is kind of a funky name for something that covers a lot of different stuff. What this is really about is it makes sense for products that generate a lot of non-interface data. So all of our products, the kinds of interactions you're seeing, where am I clicking, where am I going, what am I using, what feature am I using, every product is going to have those. But some products generate other sorts of information. So for example, at 7 Cups, we have chats, right? We have people coming in and putting in a lot of text. When I was at Mashable, obviously we had a ton of content. That's what we did. We had videos, we had articles, we had all sorts of other stuff. At first, no one, if you're just launching something, you don't have a lot of that. Over time, that can become a really big source of very interesting information that you can combine with other things to come to smart conclusions. And you're going to have to manage it in a sort of database. This is a whole engineering sort of taking. The other thing is a larger org with multiple teams and products. So again, if you're in a larger place, you may have just sort of that interface data, but it may be in 3 different analytics suites because you have 3 different product lines and none of them are talking to each other. And so when you're trying to do things like acquire users or figure out how many users you have, all of your information is not talking to each other and you're sort of confused, right? There are things where it's not that you're having a very data-heavy product, but just that you have enough going on that isn't talking to each other that this could be worth doing. And so again, what you need is a meaningful data set other than just web analytics. This does take engineering time. It literally costs money to maintain a larger database and to put it on AWS and all of those things. This doesn't make sense unless that is really like a meaningful thing that isn't just like, here's what people clicked on. And again, there are a lot of specialized hires that you'll need. So again, as we move on that spectrum, it's not that things are better further right on the spectrum. They are more costly and more specialized the further you go. So to do this, you need data engineers. You are going to have to do a bunch of work to keep this going. But again, what it does allow you to do is take advantage of some of that rich data, whether it's your own, like the last 4 years of information that you've been generating with your own stuff. It might be third-party data or data that's really core to your industry. So when I was at Mashable, we built out an internal tool that would actually crawl the web and pull in all of the new content being created, whether it was our competitors writing other articles, whether it was someone uploading something hilarious to YouTube. Actually pull all of that in and hit Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn's APIs to pull in information about what was being shared, so we could have a real-time predictive dashboard that was like, here's the best stuff on the internet, so our writers could find it before everyone else could write about it. That was really, it took a lot of work to do that, but that was really powerful to say, these are data signals that we're not generating, but if we pull them into our system and add them with our own information, we can suddenly not only make smart decisions as product managers, but create a tool that lets our whole organization be data-driven. That was an example where it was worth that effort for us to invest in pulling all of this, because again, getting that stuff out there fast, being the person that's going to get the story shared and drawing eyeballs to our site is literally how we exist as an organization, because it was ad-supported. So there is real power in this. It's also really useful, like I said, when you have siloed things. So another example that we had is we started doing affiliate sales. When you do affiliate sales, you work with like 4 or 5 different vendors to do it. And each one of them has its own dashboard. And then separately, you have your own dashboard of like who's reading what article or who's seeing what page. And suddenly to do like one spreadsheet for a human being, they have to go to 6 different places to pull numbers and copy paste them, make some mistakes along the way, and try to take a step back and be like, what do people like buying from us? That's the actually important question, right? What kinds of products are people buying? Which ones of these are most successful? Let's focus on that and make a strategic decision. It was really hard to do. So that was a place where, again, it was worth the effort because it was tied to revenue to say, let's put in some engineering effort, pull all this information out as APIs, and put it together in a place where we can sort of make a unified decision. And then moving into the world of data science, advanced math for analysis. This really makes sense when your product wants to answer a question that's not about the user experience. So a good example of this actually is here at 7 Cups, where I am. We want to understand not just how people are interacting with our product, but whether we are helping people get better in a clinically provable way with their mental health, right? So that's different from, are you using our app the most? Are you chatting the most? You might be doing all those things. You may or may not be getting better. This is a separate sort of larger research and strategic question. We want to look at all of the ways people use our product, which has many different features, and say which of these helps people the most, and not just which of these is most engaging. It's 2 different questions. So suddenly that's a place where it's really useful for us to actually have a research team and have people who sit down with really big chunks of information and go through it to try to come to larger strategic decisions. Again, you need that meaningful data set. You will need specialized data hires, including data scientists or researchers or whatever you call them at your particular organization. And it is often worth it if you have enough data. So you usually can't do this sort of analysis with like a scarce data set, a year's worth of data. You usually are, this is the kind of thing where you want multi-year information. You want a really rich sort of, at least medium to big size data. It doesn't always have to be big data. You want at least medium data if you're going to be moving into this space. Otherwise, it's not really good use. You should hire another engineer before you hire another data scientist if you're not quite there yet. And again, the thing to not forget is that data scientists, they can do this work, but they need to clean the data and make it structured and consistent before they can run mathematical analysis on it. So for a lot of data science teams, the bulk of the work that they're doing is not even the analysis, it's getting the data ready to analyze. So anything you can do as a product manager when you're making decisions along the way to make your data cleaner, to store it and structure it in ways that are smarter is going to help you when you get to the point where having this sort of complicated analysis of your work is really meaningful. And the last one, that's again in that data science thing, and it's also the most costly of all of the things that we've talked about, and the highest investment to get to is predictive machine learning models. So this is the space where like people are really excited about ML and AI. We're trying to think of ways to involve ML and AI with everything. And there are scientists, I'm very bullish on data scientists, they're on the management algorithms team, but you have to understand what it can and can't do for you and whether it's going to be an added value right now for your product or for your company. If you're at a really big company and you guys have a ton of money, great, go for it. Like you have room to have an R&D team and do some experimentation. But if you're not in that sort of setting, you have to think critically about what does this actually add to my environment. So where machine learning models, and what machine learning actually is, just to take a pause and talk and get really specific about it. A lot of the data analysis that you do in the previous part is someone saying, I'm going to do this sort of math to take a bunch of data that's in the past, come to some conclusions. We as a company are going to say, that conclusion is great, or that approach to it makes sense, and take human different actions, or then we're going to engineer and program our decision tree in a different way. Machine learning takes a set of data that already exists, trains a computer to understand it and recognize it, then gives it all new data and asks it to use what it already learned to make decisions on the new data. So when we actually take a step back, that means you need not just a lot of data to start. It really only makes sense for you to be doing this if you're going to have repeated decisions to make in the future. Otherwise, you've done this really high-cost thing, and you haven't really saved yourself any time, because a human could have done it. You only have to do this 3 more times, just have a person do it. It's cheaper, they're really good at doing all sorts of things. The reason you want a machine to do it is it's going to happen a lot, it's going to happen at a scale where suddenly hiring more people to do this task is no longer necessarily a good idea, or this task is so complicated that people aren't really that good at it. And that's when it makes sense to do a machine learning model. So an example I'm going to give is that at Productio Health, we've literally got HIPAA-compliant medical records so that we could go through and figure out, there were some people who just, were already diagnosed with mental health conditions and needed to get to care, but a lot of people don't get diagnosed. That's one of the biggest issues we have in the US right now is underdiagnosis of mental health. So we actually did machine learning to say, what can we look at in this set of data that we have to find people who look like they're high risk. And then as we get new patients and as we move forward and people's medical records change, we can say, we think this person looks like a high-risk individual, let's get them into care or take all of our next steps that we would take from there. The only other people who could do that is like doctors, and hiring a bunch of doctors to by hand review medical records is like probably not legit for HIPAA anyway, but it's not feasible, right? That's not a business model. But if you can get to a point where you're accurate enough at this complicated task that you have to do at scale, suddenly this becomes a meaningful way to innovate and to sort of distinguish yourself and to have a point with your machine learning. So again, big amount of past data, high volume of future decisions or actions to be taken is when this really makes sense. This takes very specialized engineering hires and very specialized data hires in order to pull off. But again, it lets you make predictions about the future. It lets you replace human labor. It's incredibly powerful, and that's why it is so high cost if it works out. The one don't forget about that I'll say there, because I think the rest is already pretty clear, is that not all fields of machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it, are equally advanced or equally sort of easy to use right now. So we're at the point where there actually are companies trying to do AI or ML as a service via an API. So there are now like a couple players in that space. It's starting to happen. It's a lot easier to do in the world of computer vision, where we've made a lot of progress in the past couple of years, and you can, for a lot of tasks, do a reasonably good job with an API of recognizing human faces, right? We've gotten really good at that technologically. That is something you could sort of use off the shelf. We have not made nearly as much progress sort of as an industry in understanding human language. Human language is a lot more complicated. Doing natural language processing, generating human-sounding interactions, all of those are things where, again, we've made huge progress, but that is much harder to do still to this day off the shelf than computer vision, where a lot of things are becoming standardized. So recognizing sort of where in the industry your space is and getting a good sense of, is this a place where we've gotten pretty good at things and I can actually use this as a tool, or we're sort of still in the experimental research phase and it's not quite there yet today. That's a really important part of making this decision as well. So to bring it all back together, all sorts of data out there for a PM, you really should be a champion of it. You should look at the data, you should learn the data, and you should love the data. And that is, for a lot of people, going to be stuff that we talked about when it comes to analytics and web interactions. You're responsible for your user, and one of the most consistent signals you have about what your user is doing, what is and isn't working for them, is that analytics data that we talked about at the beginning. So familiarize yourself with it and make sure that you are that person translating it into a story to tell someone else. This is a great way to make your point with executives. It's a great way to make your point with engineers. It's a great way when you're grappling with like, what do I do, to sort of make the point to yourself. Turn those data points into contextual action items and use that to prioritize your work. And also use that same sort of approach to making this decision, right? How much data is it worth it for me to invest in? And it's all that exact same toolkit that says what is providing value to me today. What else could I do if I didn't do this with my time or my engineer's time? Do all of that same thinking to figure out where on that spectrum it makes sense for you to invest. Everyone should be doing the beginning. Over time, it may make sense for wherever you are to scale up. They don't have to go in a linear way, though they often do. And don't feel it's a spectrum and not a pyramid, because the goal is not to get to the top, or the goal is not to get all the way over to the right side. It's just to figure out what's right for you, and not to give into pressure to like get so excited about data and the buzzwords that you're suddenly making decisions that are not good for you or for your users. And that's it. Any questions?